Hi, my name is Alicia Avila. I'm a licensed clinical social worker here in San Diego. I'm originally from Mexico City. Welcome. This is a video giving you what I've learned so far as I've transitioned to working fully online, both in teaching and in practice, and also as a client receiving EMDR therapy online. So first, I want to talk about the space that you're in. It's important that you have a private, comfortable space, both for client and clinician. It's important that we still protect client confidentiality. At times, I even add headphones if I think there's any chance that anybody else in the house might be in anywhere near earshot. Is that what you call it? And for your clients as well, it might be important for them to have headphones on at the time just to improve the privacy, and also sometimes to hear your therapist better, right in your ears. Sometimes the therapist will have a softer tone of voice as we're guiding you through in certain parts of the session. And at the same time, I know sometimes it can be distracting. I have one client where her headphones, when we start doing the bilateral stimulation, the cable starts swinging and it's distracting for her. So there are going to be individual differences, but we want to have a comfortable private space. As part of that, I encourage you to have, for your client, to have things that might be grounding to them around them. If the session gets intense, you might ask them to pull up something that is comforting or grounding for them. I encourage you, our therapists and clients, to have maybe a wrap or a comfortable blanket. There may be some moments where we do some nurturing work where it might be nice to be able to guide the client into wrapping themselves with a blanket or a comfortable wrap, and feel the pressure as you would if you were being held. And sometimes it's nice for the therapist to do it alongside with the client for that mirroring piece, and really to be with the client as best we can even when we're working remotely. So having a comfortable wrap, having things around you that are comforting to you. I have my Snoopy here, and so I sometimes ask my clients to pull up something that is the equivalent of their Snoopy to have nearby, or they might have their actual dog on their lap. Again, sometimes that can be distracting, but sometimes it's also comforting. So we evaluate the distraction to comfort ratio. I also have this great gift that was given to me. Can you recognize who this is?
Taking care is one way to show your love. Another way is letting people take good care of you when you need it.
So Mr. Rogers has been a very helpful co-therapist for me, and very helpful for those of us who need a grounding, calm presence of someone who is all accepting of wherever we are and whatever emotions we're having. It's not about getting rid of emotions, but being able to be with ourselves and our emotions in a way that is nurturing and helps us to work through them. So comfortable environment, both for therapist and client. Having tissues around is important. Some of my clients have, if they're working with me and having to go in their car for more privacy, they're having to use their phone. So having a place that you can rest your phone so that you don't have to be holding it. In fact, at times when technology is not working with me, if the audio gets too hesitant or weird, or there's too much pauses, we can use the phone for the audio. And so I would call my client on the phone and put it on speaker, put it right here on the desk, mute my computer and have the client mute their computer. And now we can have the audio over the phone and still have video. And I do have one client where we are just doing phone calls. And so we have to work with what is accessible and available to our clients. At times, a couple times my computer has completely shut down. And so it's important that you can pick up your phone and continue the session on the phone while you figure out if your computer is going to come back or not. So it's important that you have your client's phone number, that you know the location from which they're receiving the session, and an emergency contact like we would with any client that we're seeing in the office, just in case anything else happens. It hasn't been something that I've had to use, but it's good to have so that if I need to do a welfare check on my client, or if I need to call their emergency contact, I can report to them where they are if they are needing help. Cell phone number or house number, emergency contact, and the location from which they are calling you. So comfortable private space, tissues, maybe even a pillow that you can hug. And we'll also talk about how I use this for possible bilateral stimulation. I mentioned headphones, the computer setup. It's helpful to have your computer, if you're using a laptop, to have it propped up on something so that it's not, so you're not having to look down and the camera's looking up at you. By the way, it's helpful to have a computer where the camera is up top and not, some of them have it down below. And so that instead of having your client looking up at you, that you have better eye contact with your client. So I have my laptop propped up on a box, and I found a good use for my DSM, a good thick book to put there. So, and it's also good for your client to have their computer, I have found, propped up, so that sometimes clients, when they first come online, it looks something like this. And we want to see as much of each other and as much of our clients as possible. So I ask the client to move their computer screen again, or prop up the laptop so that it's a little bit higher up, so we have better eye contact, and we want to see at least this much of our client, right? We're missing so much, so at least see this much. So work with your client to and go online first and see what you look like, and see that that everything is as best possible to really connect with your client. And I already talked about dress. You want to make sure that you are fully and appropriately dressed, even though we might be a little bit more comfortable in telemedicine and in our own homes, that we are appropriately covered up, that when we lean forward, we're still appropriately dressed, that if I spill water on me and I have to suddenly get up, even though I didn't think I was going to have to get up, that we are still fully and appropriately dressed. So both for my trainings and for sessions, I ask that of myself and of those that I'm working with to be fully appropriately dressed, even if a little bit more casual and comfortable. We want to use a HIPAA compliant platform, even though some of the regulations have been laxed around COVID. I have found it pretty simple to find a HIPAA compliant platform. So the ones that I use, Doxy has a free, to make it HIPAA compliant for any of these platforms that may be HIPAA, they may say HIPAA compliant, but they're not HIPAA compliant until you have your BAA, your Business Associate Agreement. So make sure you download a Business Associate Agreement to maintain HIPAA level confidentiality. So Doxy offers one, both a paid portion and a free portion. And I'm also using Google Suite, G Suite, which offers a very affordable package, so that you also get email as part of that and a few other things. So those are the ones that I'm using. In teaching, I know I use a HIPAA compliant Zoom, thanks to the EMDR Institute, but I don't have my own for my own private trainings or therapy sessions. I use DoxyMe or Google Suite at the time. So let's now talk about doing bilateral stimulation online for EMDR therapy. So if you are trained in EMDR therapy or going through the training, we're going to be using bilateral stimulation for EMDR therapy. And for eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, it's important that you're still able to offer eye movements as bilateral stimulation. Eye movements are the most difficult to do, both for client and clinician, but they have the most research. So we want to default to eye movements and then move to tactile and auditory dual attention or bilateral stimulation as is needed in that moment in session or for that client over time. So to offer eye movements, I've been very impressed with how well it has worked. I like to go low tech as possible, unless I really have to use some of the technology, because we're all using more technology than we are used to. So even though I have all the gadgets for bilateral stimulation, when I'm a client, I could use those, but instead so I end up either using the ceiling line, so I'll talk to you about that, or even a curtain rod. But I'm going to talk to you about many other options that I also use, especially in the EMDR trainings. So Jennifer Lendl has been doing EMDR performance enhancement work since EMDR began. And because she often worked over the years with athletes around the world, and she's very low tech, usually just over the phone. So she did a training for some of us where she talked about how she's been doing this on the phone. And we could see the contact. We were on a Zoom call and she was on the phone. So we could see the contact that she had with her client. Even though she was only on the phone, we could see the client. And so one of the things that she has done over the years is just ask the client to look up at the corner of their room, look up where your walls meet and where the ceiling meets, and look up at that corner, and then move your eyes across to the other corner of the room, of course, without moving your head, right? And for people who wear glasses, when you're doing eye movements, whether you're in the office or remotely, it's better to take your glasses off. You're less likely to get dizzy or nauseous. But be aware that for some clients, for some of us, having our clients off makes the world very fuzzy, and that can feel unsafe for some people. So if the client feels safe enough to take their glasses off, it might ease the eye movements. So then you can use the ceiling line for your eye movements and go from one corner to the other. Now, I don't want to be straining or looking up too much. So usually if I'm a client, I will actually back up. And I actually use that wall because that wall is wider. So I would be backing up and using a wall that has enough of a range of motion for my eye movements so that I'm not looking up too high. So it's still fairly comfortable, even though eye movements are not the easiest thing to do, but that is part of what maintains dual attention. So on top of that, what Jennifer Lendl has done over the years is that she'll also pace it out with the client. Again, she's on the phone, and she's in her office and pacing out what would be the right rhythm for reprocessing. Again, reprocessing phases of EMDR therapy would be phase 4, 5, and 6, desensitization, installation, and body scan. So she's in her office and figuring out the pace, and over the phone saying 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. So that pacing gets the client to get the right rhythm for rhythmic, saccadic, rapid eye movements. When I've tried this online with a couple clients, they said, Alicia, that's too distracting, so please don't do that. So I'm thinking maybe it's better for those who are on the phone. I'm thinking on the phone, it may help with that connection to the therapist. It may help with that dual attention, but for some clients, it may help online as well. And for some clients, even over the phone, it might be too distracting. So we need to adjust to what works and what maintains dual attention for that client. So we're going to take a lot more time to figure that out for each client in each session and those moments in session. So besides doing the 1, 2, some clinicians are using a sound to keep the rhythm. As they're doing eye movements, so the clinician can keep the sound. The downside of that I have found is that depending on people's broadband, and it's not just the clinician's broadband connection, but also the client's, sometimes there's a delay or hesitation in the sound going through. So that can be, again, more distracting. So having the client instead, if they need that kind of pacing strategy, having them download a metronome might be helpful. Although with my clients, I just get them started, and granted, a lot of my clients I was already seeing before the pandemic, and so they're used to the rhythm of it. But you can also teach a new client by saying, good, a little faster, good, and just letting them know that it's as fast as you can possibly conceive. Okay, so I'll give you the examples in a moment. So the ceiling line, again, as a client, sometimes I go to another room where I have a curtain rod that seems like a good thing to follow, and it's seems like a good range of motion for me. You can go as simple as just the screen on your laptop. Of course, if you have a client who's using a cell phone or a tablet, the screen may not be big enough, or those laptops that are smaller. Even this laptop, which is a little bigger, might be too small for a good range of motion for eye movements. If I'm sitting back here and I'm using the top of the screen for my eye movements, I don't think I'm getting enough range of motion. Of course, my therapist will be looking at my eyes and letting me know if she wants me to try something that gets a wider range of motion. If I lean forward and I come closer, it's a little better. And again, the therapist can go say a little faster, Alicia, and then we would get to a good fast rhythm, as fast as I can possibly tolerate. It's actually a little easier for me. And perhaps you could even put some Post-it on the edges of the screen if that helps to have both a line and two places to focus. It's easier for me to use two objects in the room. So I have a secondary screen to my left and a fan to my right. And so if I look between the fan and the secondary screen, now notice my range of motion here and how fast I can go. Okay, and at the end, you come back here. By the way, usually in the office, we would be off to the side. We call it shifts passing in the night, so that we are off to one side, so that we're not knee to knee with our client. Instead, we're off to the side, like if it was this way and I was over here. And so I have talked to my clients about whether that would be helpful if I move off to the side while they're doing the BLS, or they could also shrink the screen that they're seeing me in. That hasn't been necessary. I'm wondering if online having me take up the full screen is just enough contact without, I'm not in their face because I'm just on the screen. So just be aware of that and check it out with your client to see if that feels fine for them. So eye movements, so the ceiling line, a curtain rod. If you see the closet behind me, I could turn around and use that top line above the closet if that was wide enough. I'm not sure if that would be wide enough, but some people have used a piece of furniture or a window in front of them and they can look from one side to the other. Or again, just putting these Post-it notes on the wall that I'm facing and just spacing them. And it'd be a little trial and error to space it out and make sure that it works. With my clients, sometimes I have them like move their laptop around and I'm looking around the room to help them find a good either line or two objects that they can follow. With one of my clients, as we were looking around her room, I noticed some pillows on a sofa. And so if so I asked her to pull out two pillows, put them distinctly on that sofa, and then she could face the sofa and look from one side to the other. But I could also just put these pillows on either side of my computer screen and use those for the eye movements. So again, it's more about what's going to help your eyes move back and forth in that saccadic rhythm than what it is that you're following. You also want to be able to use diagonals because at times we need to change the bilateral dual attention stimulation to keep things moving. So if the material gets stuck, we want to be able to move to one diagonal and then to the other. So again, I could use that ceiling fan and then my notepad down here. And so let's see how that works. And I think it's actually a little better if I use my cell phone here and the fan. Let's see. I think that might be a little better. Again, my clinician will be watching me and letting me know how that works. For my other diagonal, I could use the same screen and then my mouse for my computer. And if your client meets with you in the same space each time, you could jot those down or jot them down at the beginning of the session so that during reprocessing, my clinician could say to me, Alicia, why don't you go ahead and do the screen and the mouse diagonal, or use the fan and your cell phone diagonal. But she could also say, let's try one diagonal and now let's try, and we would do that for one set and see if that gets things moving again. And if not, then she could say, let's try the other diagonal now and see how that works. Also want to talk about the possibility of going to tactile dual attention bilateral stimulation. And so the simplest way to do that is just a regular butterfly hug. This feels good for some people. It's kind of like having a hug. And again, we want to do rapid rhythmic saccadic movements with that. For some people, they want to do a butterfly hug that takes advantage of some meridian points right under your collarbone. So you can hook your thumbs together and tap right here. And so you can do that. And for some clients, they'd rather just be tapping on their legs. Initially, I was concerned as a therapist that I wouldn't be able to see their tapping on their legs, but you can see that you can hear it. And you see that you can hear it. You can hear it, and you can also see, in this case, you can see my arms moving. Sometimes if you don't, if the computer is not set up this way, you might even just be able to see my shoulders move, because the clinician wants to know what the rhythm is so that they can coach you into going a little faster if necessary. For stabilization techniques like the safe place and other resource development installation, you're going to go slow. Stabilization begins with an S, so slow bilateral stimulation for stabilization. But I'm talking mostly about reprocessing right now. So tapping, if you used auditory, you could have the client snap their fingers back and forth. And so again, we want to have bilateral stimulation options as clinical options. Is not what is most comfortable to the client, but in general, what's going to get the most change and maintain dual attention. Let's see, what else do I want to mention? So if you do, if somebody is having trouble using these techniques, there are many of online options. The one that I'm more familiar with is bilateralstimulation.io. I like it because it's free, it's simple, easy to use. So I open a secondary window and go to bilateralstimulation.io, or I do that on my iPad so I can have a secondary screen and click on therapist. And again, there are many of options in terms of speed, in terms of the color of the ball that goes back and forth. They also have auditory options. If you use the auditory options, I find it, again, because of the broadband issues and the hesitation with sound at times, better to have the sound be on the client's end and not my end. I also like this one, bilateralstimulation.io, because I don't have to give up any client information. So I go on there, click on therapist, name my session, and I usually name it by day of the week. So it'll be like Tuesday session. I just call it Tuesday. I send that link by email to my client. They open up that link and I can start and stop it, and they can have it on their screen or on a secondary device. Again, it depends on how wide their screen is. And you want to get full range of motion for your bilateral stimulation. So it's better to have, if you're going to use two screens, so the client is going to use two screens, to have the therapist on a small screen and the bilateral stimulation on a wider screen. Or you can just have it on two windows in your desktop or laptop. If you're using a tablet or a phone, it's going to be too small to get the full range of motion for eye movements. And again, we're all already adjusting to more technology than we're used to, so I'd like to use that as a last resort. For those of you who are working in the office with clients but want to have some kind of distancing strategy for their safety and yours, you can use some of these same techniques at a distance so that you're not having to go up really close to them and using your hand. You can be sitting back and having them use two Post-it notes on the wall that are they're facing, or have them use, again, a window or a ceiling line across from where they're seated. So, did I mention stress balls? So I have these cute little elephant stress balls. And so that could also be tactile stimulation. And that reminds me of my hands. Hands are good spots for eye movements. So I can do horizontal eye movements with my hands. I can do diagonals. So just using the hands as two objects in the room, since we usually have these with us. Oh, and did I mention tissue boxes? So a lot of us have tissue boxes around, or maybe it's just me because I have a chronically runny nose and not a therapist. So so tissue boxes could also be used as two objects to use for eye movements. And also, if you're working in person but want to maintain social distance, sometimes having a pointer, an extendable pointer, and if you just Google extendable pointer, there are all kinds out there. And then you can be a little bit further away from your client and still be doing eye movements. It's important that you don't default to windshield wiping though, that you're going straight across. So I hope that's helpful. I'm sure as soon as I turn this off, I'm going to think of other things that I didn't mention, but at least this might get you started.